After a mild and wild winter, change is in the air.
Spring has arrived, but with the beauty of Mother Nature comes her wrath.
Oh my goodness!
Look at that tornado!
Tornadoes,
There is a tornado right in front of me.
torrential rains, and flooding.
This is bad.
Severe weather season is officially upon us.
Look at the wind.
We're taking a deep dive into what that means.
Oh my God.
And we're getting you ready.
When thunder roars, go indoors.
We're keeping you safe.
Well, thank you so much for tuning into the Fox 6 Spring Weather Special. Mother Nature, of course, can be fascinating. That's how we all ended up in this career. But it can also be very dangerous.
That's right. Coming up, we're going to talk a lot about a number of different factors. We've got weather advice, and we're hoping you're going to learn something and maybe a fun factor, too.
But most importantly, we, of course, want to keep you safe during a storm.
And after the winter we had, it's time to think warmer thoughts. It's time for a toast. Birds are chirping, the plants and flowers are blooming. Spring is here. Let's kick off our coverage with Tom. He got a look at the weather trend we expect to see this spring.
Well, we're coming off of a very warm El Nino winter, so what does the spring look like? Here's the official forecast from the Climate Prediction Center showing that we are forecast to continue to see above average temperatures through April, May, and June. Now, it's important to mention these are averages, so we're still going to have our dips. We're still going to have our roller coaster rides in terms of temperatures at times, but overall, an above average spring is in the forecast in terms of temperature. Now, precipitation is somewhat interesting because most of the country is under really a 50-50 chance for wetter or drier than average in terms of precipitation, with the drier areas in the southwest towards parts of South Texas there, southwest Texas, and also into the northwestern United States, with the overall wetter pattern being across the southeast. So what does that mean for us around here? Well, again, it just means kind of the back and forth storm systems coming on through, and it's going to depend on if storm systems align just right for us to get under some heavy rain from time to time. So again, overall, large-scale pattern-wise, we're not looking at anything major in terms of being wetter than average, but it's going to come down to the smaller scale individual storm systems to determine just how wet we'll be for the spring. So we did have an El Nino winter, which means that the ocean temperatures in the equatorial Pacific have been above average. That in turn changed the jet stream pattern and caused us to have, well, that warmer winter. So what's happening now? Well, El Nino is starting to weaken, and what you're seeing here, these are the sea surface temperatures still above average. So we are still in an El Nino phase, but it's starting to weaken. So as we go into spring, the forecast is that we're going to enter neutral conditions, meaning that these warmer than average sea surface temperatures that in turn change the jet stream, that's going to start to weaken. We're going to get into more of a neutral phase, and then by summer, La Nina conditions are in the forecast. What is that? Well, that's the opposite of El Nino, right? So that's going to be cooler than average sea surface temperatures in the equatorial Pacific. That's going to likely create more of a wavy pattern to the jet stream, so it's likely to mean more back and forth type weather for the summertime with La Nina conditions. So storms off and on throughout the summer, and again, almost more of a roller coaster ride pattern as we go into the summertime with La Nina conditions. So again, we're going from an El Nino winter to a La Nina summer.
All right, thank you, Tom. And of course, we are always doing write-ups on the weather and these patterns. We have a whole bunch of extra content on the Fox Local app. You can just scroll right through, and we continue to update that as well as our website, of course, fox6.com.
Right.
Yeah, fox6now.com.
It's going to be interesting. I think it's going to be an interesting summer, of course, as we've already seen throughout the late winter, right? Kind of the wild weather patterns. And I think we're going to kind of see that as we head throughout the next couple of months.
And it's fascinating to see how, this winter really did fall into that El Nino category. Yeah. So now as we shift to this neutral phase and into La Nina, will it again follow kind of the textbook pattern, or will it kind of carve out its own course?
Right. Exactly.
We're excited to see. And of course, we've been talking about the spring months, severe weather, and we kind of want to dive into a little bit of our severe weather as well here in southeast Wisconsin.
Look at that. Look at the debris. That's a tornado. Oh my God.
The sights and sounds of severe weather. They come in all different varieties, and we've learned this year it can happen anywhere, anytime. The Midwest is an area across the United States that regularly sees thunderstorm development, especially during our summer months. Think May, June, July, and it's because of this typical summer setup. Including Wisconsin, it's a battleground area between cool and dry air coming in from Canada and that warm and tropical air coming in from the Gulf of Mexico. So what do we even need for thunderstorms to develop? Three main ingredients. The first being instability, which is the amount of energy in the atmosphere. Number two being moisture. Think of those high dew points, those high humidity levels that we oftentimes see, especially during those summer months. And number three is a lifting mechanism. This would be a warm front, a cold front, or some type of boundary, which in some cases could even be a lake breeze. Now, for a thunderstorm to be considered severe, these are the criteria that a thunderstorm would need to be capable of producing to have that severe watch or warning be issued. Hail of 1 inch in diameter or larger, wind gusts of 58 miles per hour or higher, the potential for flash flooding from those torrential downpours that a lot of times we see within severe thunderstorms, or the possibility of a tornado. When there is a threat for severe weather, there are a lot of tools that meteorologists look at when it comes to forecasting, and then there are a lot that we actually show on air to help us get the point across or the threat across. And this is one of those examples. This is a convective outlook, and these are put out by the Storm Prediction Center in Norman, Oklahoma. This shows the area across the U.S. that has the potential for severe weather on a given day. It goes out 3 days, so we could show you a day 1 outlook, a day 2 outlook, or a day 3 outlook. Looking at this map, you can clearly tell the areas that have the threat for severe weather. Look at the lower Mississippi Valley and the Gulf Coast. There are 3 different risks here. The green being marginal, which is a level 1, the yellow being a slight, which is a level 2, and the orange being an enhanced, which is a level 3. Now, each one of these risks technically have their own definition, and sometimes it gets a little bit confusing. So at the very least, it's best to know the level of severity with each one of these. Just think of 1 to 5, with marginal being a level 1 risk or the lowest threat for severe weather, and high being a level 5 risk, the highest threat for severe weather. A lot of times in southeast Wisconsin, we're seeing a lot of marginals and slights, which usually mean isolated to scattered severe thunderstorms, either low intensity storms or varied intensity storms when we have slight risks. Now, sometimes we do have enhanced risks here. We've seen it before. This means numerous severe thunderstorms expected once again at varied intensity. So we could have some lower intensity storms, but we could still have some moderate to even high intensity storms within that enhanced risk. Now, the moderates and the highs, those are more common for areas south of us. Think Tornado Alley, the Great Plains, and those a lot of times are reserved for extreme severe weather outbreaks. Think strong tornadoes of EF2 strength or higher, very strong straight line winds, derecho type situations, squall lines. So a lot of times here in southeast Wisconsin, we're mainly looking at marginal and slights, but sometimes we can also see enhanced. And now to the basics. It's a great time to refamiliarize yourself with the basic watch versus warning. A watch means that severe weather could happen. The ingredients are present in the atmosphere to have thunderstorms reach that severe criteria. A warning is issued when severe weather is happening. All of those ingredients come together for a final product. In this case, it's a cupcake. But whenever a warning is issued, it is best to take action, know your safe spot, and wait out until that warning has been finalized or ended.
All right.
Great
well,
video.
It's a river of hail right there. And of course, there's also lightning strikes, damaging wind. All of that can be incredibly dangerous. And we are going to be taking a trip back in time now, just kind of looking at some of the nastier storms, if you will, that can happen in the spring and have happened, specifically focused on tornadoes right now.
And we don't have to go very far back in time to see funnel clouds. This past February, it was the first for Wisconsin. The twisters span from Greene County to Rock County. One confirmed tornado in Evansville was rated a high-end EF2 with wind speeds topping out at an estimated 135 miles per hour. It was on the ground for 36 minutes, traveling nearly 25 miles.
And now we're going to take you back to 2011. April 10th, 2011, 15 tornadoes were reported in Wisconsin. A record outbreak for the month of April. Most of them were in the northeast part of the state. One of them was an EF2 tornado that hit the city of Kaukauna. The winds were up to 120 miles per hour. More than 150 homes in the city were damaged.
And during the afternoon of June 14th in 2017, a line of severe thunderstorms moved across east central Wisconsin, producing 10 confirmed tornadoes. Now, they were mostly northwest and southwest of Green Bay. This is video from Appleton, where an EF1 tornado touched down.
A record tornado touched down in northwestern Wisconsin. May 16th, 2017, the tornado was passed with 83 miles long. It's the tornado with the longest track of continuous damage in Wisconsin since modern tornado records were being kept all the way back to 1950. The hardest hit areas were just north of Chedek, where an EF2 damage was found, and then in the Conrath area, EF3 damage occurred. One person was killed, dozens were injured.
And in March of 2020, a storm moved through the Midwest, spawning 3 tornadoes between Wisconsin and Iowa. Now, the tornadoes were weak, but they did still cause some damage.
Some amazing video there. I mean, whether it's the river of hail or just the incredible power of tornadic or even straight line winds to just twist metal, it always fascinates me and probably always will.
And as we've said, not to interrupt, but what we've seen this year, though, is it can happen anytime.
Exactly.
Right? We've always said, oh, it's never happened in the month of February, right, as long as records have been kept. Not anymore.
Right, exactly.
And with your setup, when we were talking about before, you alluded to it being a little bit messy. Things, obviously, in the spring are dynamic.
They are. And so, we go through the basics here. It's just so important going into severe weather season to know those basics, know the watch versus the warnings, know that Storm Prediction Center convective outlook that we often show. That's how we easily can communicate with you guys, our viewers, when there is a threat for severe weather. And of course, any time of year, as we just talked about, as we just dealt with this a couple months ago.
There you go. And we get a wide variety of severe weather, right, Lisa?
We do. Not just tornadoes, but we've been talking about the damaging winds, lightning, hail, flooding, and really to be prepared at any and all times of the year, as Tom mentioned, is crucial. What we are dealing with is the main weather of various types of severe weather that Wisconsin experiences. These include flooding, lightning, large hail of 1 inch or greater in diameter, damaging winds that are 57 miles per hour or higher, and tornadoes. The highest number of severe weather events that occur in southeast Wisconsin are large hail, damaging winds, and tornadoes. While severe weather is no stranger to southeast Wisconsin, in fact, this area has more severe weather events than central and northern portions of the state. Waukesha County holds the most severe weather events, totaling 464 from 1844 to 2023. Dodge, Jefferson, and Walworth counties follow with just over 300 events. So let's break down each type a little bit further for each county to see which are impacted the most. For flooding events, Jefferson, Waukesha, and Milwaukee and Kenosha counties were at the top of the list. Lightning were reports that were caused and reported by damage from lightning. The highest was in Waukesha County with a total of 83 reports. Severe hail events were listed where at least 3/4 of an inch in diameter prior to 2010 were reported, and at least 1 inch in diameter from 2010 until now. Waukesha has the most hail events, totaling 166, with Dodge, Jefferson, and Walworth counties following with just over 100. Thunderstorm wind events, where straight line winds are greater than 57 miles per hour. Waukesha, Jefferson, and Walworth counties all had over 200 reports. For tornadoes, note that tornado data was incomplete prior to 1950, so this data shows 1950 to 2023. Fond du Lac and Dodge counties had the highest tornado count with over 60 tornadoes. Jefferson, Waukesha, and Walworth counties followed with over 40 tornadoes. It's clear that severe weather is an active part of our spring pattern, so we asked National Weather Service Warning Coordinator, meteorologist Tim Halbach, what he thought this year could bring.
It's very hard to predict severe weather events and how often we're going to get them. Every season's a little bit different for whether or not those elements come together, if the timing's all right. So that's one of the harder things to try to nail down.
While it may be hard to predict how much severe weather we will see in 2024, we still need to be alert for severe weather and tornadoes at all times in the year. Peak tornado season in Wisconsin is May through August, but we have experienced tornadoes in every month. In fact, Wisconsin had the first ever recorded February tornadoes in the history this past February. On average, Wisconsin experiences 23 tornadoes per year. There are two ways that tornadoes can occur in Wisconsin. The first is in a supercell, an individual smaller scale storm that rotates and typically produces stronger and longer lasting tornadoes. The second is a squall line, a long line of storms where portions of the line can have rotation and cause a brief spin up tornado. These are usually on the ground for a shorter duration and were weaker between the two types. Southeast Wisconsin experiences more squall line type tornadoes. Let's connect storms and tornadoes to activity this past winter. Milwaukee experienced the warmest winter on record, which usually consists of less snow and warmer temperatures, and that's exactly what occurred. There were 76 days above average and 23.6 inches of a snowfall deficit. In February, Southeast Wisconsin saw what would normally be considered a rare severe weather events. That raises the question, could we experience more severe events locally due to warmer winters?
If we have snow on the ground, we don't have that tornado occur. So the less periods of snow and cold that we have down on the ground, the more likely it is that as a weather system comes through, we could have a severe weather event occur with it. So you might see more frequent storms, whether or not they're more intense or things like that. It's hard to kind of gauge that part of it, but more likely that you'd have more reps or potential events.
So the key here really is to be prepared. No matter what time of the year, have some sort of safety or action plan and what you should do for each event when severe weather strikes.
Great job. That's a lot of numbers, obviously.
It is.
But great job putting together and making it as clear as possible when you've got that kind of depth of data. It's impressive, too, and I think it really speaks to the fact that, this kind of stuff happens through our entire viewing area. A lot of local weather myths about the big lake we live next to and other things, topography and, Holy Hill or whatever the case may be. But your numbers prove that, it can happen anywhere.
Yeah, and really it's very prominent that this portion of the state sees the highest amount of severe weather. And if I would have done graphics of the entire state, it would have shown that more of those orange and red boxes indicating those higher reports, that is right here, which is why we really have to be aware at all times, because it's not just tornadoes, it's the winds, the lightning, the hail, everything comes together to impact us.
Yeah.
So the data is phenomenal. I mean, this is great reporting. Question I have looking at that is, do you think there's a role too in population size, right? Because Waukesha County, for example, has a greater population than maybe some other counties. So do you think there are more reports in Waukesha County because of that?
Absolutely. And when we get some things such as lightning reports, if we have more structures where those reports are coming in of damage, of course, we're going to see higher amounts. So some of our counties that have had those higher amounts do have some higher populations, but that absolutely, I think, can factor into the amount that we've seen per county.
Yeah.
I don't know if we want to say we're lucky for having more people here, but at least we were able to gather further data, which can potentially help us in the future of how to prepare better for these events.
Sure. I really liked, too, how you broke down the tornado potential between supercells and squall lines. I think this is also a great reminder, too, when it comes to the wind threat, that a lot of times with squall lines, if they don't produce a tornado, we often get straight line winds, which sometimes could be, just as strong as a tornado or even stronger than your lower end EF0, EF1 tornado. So really, it's a reminder that even if there's just a severe thunderstorm warning and not a tornado warning, as some of these storms move through, the damage could be, just as bad as if there were a tornado warning. Treat everything with severity, really.
Right. I mean, if it's your house or your school, whether it's straight line or tornadic winds, it really doesn't matter when it impacts you directly.
Sure.
And how many times have we seen this, right? I mean, I can think of the Waukesha County Fair a couple of years ago, right? Big line of thunderstorms coming through. We often see this during fair and festival season, right? It's storm season. And it's one of those, to your point, Stephanie, take a severe thunderstorm warning just as important as a tornado warning, because you don't know exactly what could be coming out of those storms. And that's where, we're going to be on the air, right? We're on air, we're online covering that, because just looking at a radar, right, on your app may not just provide you all that information. You need to get more context when it comes to those storms.
Right. And we all live here too. We know summer weekends are priceless commodities, but we want you prepared so that you can still have a great summer and stay safe.
Exactly. All really, really great information. All right. Well, you've heard the saying, don't mess with Mother Nature. That's especially true with lightning, given just how common it is. So the question is, do you know what to do when lightning is around? Coming up, the do's and don'ts when it comes to safety.
And it happens every year. At any time of the year, flooding comes in many forms, and so does the danger. We're going with the flow and talking to one of the top flooding experts in the state. Plus,
a lot of times we see the setup happen, but we don't really actually think it's going to occur because there's so many things that have to come together for tornadoes to occur.
A new take on those February historic tornadoes. Tim Halbach shares his insight into how those storms played out through the eyes of the National Weather Service.
And later, spring allergy season arriving earlier and stronger than expected. What can help you if you're sniffling and sneezing?
And as we head to break, let's take a look at a fun fact about thunderstorms. There can be as many as 40,000 thunderstorms each day around the world. They are most common right here in the United States.
My brain wouldn't register what I was looking at. It was so dark, and I'm looking up through the family room, and the lightning would light the whole sky up.
An EF2 tornado hits Rock County, producing 135 mile-per-hour winds. That was in February. It was one of several tornadoes that we saw that day. Now, you can't talk about severe weather in Wisconsin without talking with the face of severe weather at the National Weather Service offices in Sullivan. Tom Walk sat down with Tim Halbach to talk about the severe storms.
Tim, take us through kind of a typical severe weather event from a staffing standpoint, sort of what you guys look at when it comes to severe weather and preparation.
So it all begins with the forecast and trying to figure out whether or not we even have a threat for severe weather. So on days where there might be tornadoes or damaging winds or large hail, flooding, we take a look at our calendar to see who's working, who's scheduled to be working, what times we think the threat's going to be. If it's overnight, that becomes a little bit more of a challenge because we normally don't have as many people around.
Okay.
But we plan it out so that we have people that can sit there and watch radar, can answer the phones, take storm reports, put out social media posts and all that. So it all begins with just trying to figure out what the risk is for whether or not there is going to be tornadoes or not.
And we have, of course, the Evansville tornado from February behind us here, which was one of the first tornadoes ever reported in recorded history, which is wild, in the month of February.
Right.
So maybe take us back to this date. And I think a lot of people may not realize that you guys are the ones that issue these tornado warnings. So take us to an event like this, for example. So, and this was a little bit of a different event, right? It was kind of a lower risk day, and then it kind of built up as we went through the day.
Yeah, I think if you had talked to any meteorologist like the day before, you'd be like, all right, there's enough there that we got to keep an eye on the potential for there being tornadoes. A lot of times we see the setup happen, but we don't really actually think it's going to occur because there's so many things that have to come together for tornadoes to occur. So this was a day where it went the opposite, where as we got through the morning and the early afternoon hours and skies were clearing out to the west, we knew there was going to be a little bit more of an issue going into the evening hours. So that's when we started ramping things up with saying, hey, people got to be ready for when these warnings come out. It's February. Normally you're not getting tornado warnings. Right? Yeah. You're not getting tornado warnings on your phone normally. But if you get them, these are legit. So we are the ones that as soon as we click on the button, hit out tornado warnings, it goes out on your phones, on air here, radio, weather radios. all the different spots. So we're the ones that originate that message.
That's so interesting. And this was an interesting setup from a meteorological standpoint. Dew points were in the 40s, low 50s. It was almost not your classic setup, but the wind profile was off the chart, right?
Right, and it's also what's happening above the ground too. It was pretty cold down, up above the air, so that made it a really unstable atmosphere as well. So a lot of things that came together to have this happen. And the temperature is getting into the 70s. That was one of the main things too. So,
sure.
The peak time was right around 6, 7, right when the sun was about to set, and that's typically when we see a lot of these tornadoes happen.
And they were right along that warm front, right?
Right.
Which could kind of provide a little more spin.
Right, yeah, that's typically a focus area when we're keeping an eye on any tornado situation. If any storms are going up along the warm front, there's a lot of history there of there being tornadoes and storms intensifying as they hit that front. So something that we pay extra special attention to in those situations.
Sure. Well, you guys did a phenomenal job in getting those warnings out. And we've got a couple of pictures here from this as well. And again, this is in Rock County. This was the same storm that ended up on February 8th, lifting literally as it was approaching Fort Atkinson, right, in Jefferson County.
Yeah, it held on for a really long time. I think 26 miles in total.
Wow.
It was on the ground for. And thankfully, it did end before it got too close to Fort Atkinson there. Otherwise, it might have been a direct hit with that.
Sure. So, and this was the radar that night as well as we were all tracking those storms live on the air. But something else that you may not realize that Tim and the National Weather Service do, and Tim specifically, is going out and doing damage surveys. So, here you are, you get the reports that there have been tornadoes. So now you go into overdrive, right, in terms of your role as doing tornado damage surveys to figure out what rank this tornado is, right?
Right, yeah, we've become investigators, kind of like crime scene. What happened here? Was it a tornado, or how bad of a tornado was it? We go and we document the entire path of the tornado. So where did it start? Where did it end? How wide was it? We look at every single structure that was hit by it and give it a ranking on the EF scale for the intensity of it. So based on the amount of damage that occurs is what will give the ranking of the tornado.
And you have kind of a guideline, right? You have the iPads essentially that you go through and say it hit this type of a structure?
Yeah, we have a kit that basically it's researchers that put together, if the shingles are off on a house, what kind of expected wind speed can you get out of something like that? Or if a tree's been uprooted, what kind of speed can you estimate on that? So we go and we look at every single one, we compare, look at the whole scene around it, and get an idea of how bad the damage is. So like a whole barn being collapsed could be pretty bad, but it also depends on how well it's bolted to like a foundation,
if it's a really
or something
old
like
barn
that.
or something like that, right?
Yep. So
That's
trying to piece that all together and get a feel for how bad it actually was.
And I take it you have a crew, right, that kind of goes with you?
Yeah, so we have, typically it's teams of 2 that'll go out. One person will go and talk to the people that got hit by the tornado, the residents, and ask them things like, did you get the warning? Was there a warning? Or what actions did you take when you took that warning? So with the Evansville tornado, everybody I talked to said, I got it on my phone. And they, some of them went outside to go verify the risk. Most people went to the basement, turned on TV, and followed along with the TV meteorologists out there and here to see what was going on. And that's what we recommend people do, is get a second source of information and just verify what's going on.
Sure. So talk a little more about that in terms of, I guess, the cell phone alerts, because that's something that is fairly new, right? And I know you deal with a lot of that as it pertains to the people getting the alerts on their phones. They're called the WEA alerts, right? Or WEA alerts.
Yep.
So has that really changed the ball game, in your opinion, in terms of notifications?
Well, everybody's got a cell phone on them now, and having something that will, people are busy. So when they're out and about in their garage, if it's February and they're not planning for severe weather, and their phone goes off and it makes a very loud noise, if everybody's ever gotten one, which you probably have.
Sure.
It's to get your attention, look at it, say, hey, there's a tornado warning in your area. Some of the newer phones are more targeted. So one of the issues with the cell phones in the past was there's a lot of bleed over. So you could get a tornado warning going off on your phone, even though you're maybe like a county or two away from it.
And we heard that a couple of weeks ago when Chicago had all of those tornadoes right almost up to Waukegan. We heard from people in Kenosha saying, hey, I'm getting the warning on my phone. A little bit of a bleed over there, right?
Right, yeah. So that'll happen. Sometimes people will be sitting in the same room and some people's phones will go off and others not.
Oh, interesting.
And they'll ask, and the people that have the cool new phones are probably the ones that are more targeted. But
oh, interesting. Okay, that's an interesting point as well. But really, I mean, a game changer because, you know, everybody sort of has this weather radio type product now, an alert system in their hand at all times.
Right, yeah. And almost every single time I've talked with someone that has had a tornado hit them, most times the first thing they're getting is the phone going off. Probably one of the more vulnerable spots is if you're driving. People, you know, it's hard to keep situational awareness of what's going on around you when you're in a car and your phone goes off and you're trying to figure out if that warning's for you or if it's dark out and you can't see. So another thing you can do is try to find a radio station that maybe is talking about what's going on.
Because they could get very specific.
Right.
I'm glad you bring that up, though, because in this particular storm, we were tracking it on air, and we had a camera on Interstate 39 near Edgerton.
Yep.
And we were watching this live. In fact, take a look at this. We'll take a look at a piece of this broadcast here. Look at the wind. Look at the wind. I mean, that wind... This thing has got to be crossing.
It's very, very close right now.
The trucks are now stopping. Oh my goodness. All right, we're going to continue to watch this. Again, this is a confirmed tornado that is crossing live on Interstate 39 near Edgerton. And oh my goodness, that rotation, Stephanie, just continues to get worse every time we look at it. Where the red and the green are next to each other, we'll be honest, usually it's red and green. This is red and blue. Interesting.
Oh, this is an interesting scan.
So it's over the interstate.
Yeah.
So that would have been right when you were talking.
Yes. Let's go back to that camera shot, if we could, please.
So it's passing over as we speak.
Yeah. Or it literally just crossed. And I don't know precisely. Look, see the cars pulled over there? I don't know precisely where this camera is in relation to where it crossed, but we are very close. So what's interesting and was so scary about that night is we could see the winds whipping, right, as the cell was coming across Interstate 39. So you bring up the whole point about driving in your car. What is recommended? Like in that case where we're seeing people literally driving into this storm on the interstate, what should people do if they're encountered on a dark interstate, you know, under a tornado warning, their phone is going off? What's the latest sort of advice in terms of that?
So really the first step is just if you know there's going to be storms, just wait potentially, you know, before you hit the road. If things look like they're kind of ominous, take a look at your phone or find out, you know, if I'm driving somewhere, is there going to be an issue with me driving in a certain area? There are warnings going on. Sometimes it's best just to wait like a half hour, an hour, let the storm's passed. So ideally, that's kind of the best, like not being on the road when it happens. Right. Next step is if it happens that you're on the road and something comes up, best thing is just pull over. If you're on a major interstate, maybe you can take an exit and get off. Sometimes people will go to gas stations.
Okay.
One of the things we actually learned from this last one is some of the gas stations will lock their doors when a tornado warning gets issued because they want their staff to be safe, and they'll send them, like they'll go to the shelter and they don't want people like
looting the store,
running off with some glazers or something.
Yeah, right.
So that's one of the things, you know, try to find a way to get more information off the road.
Okay.
If the tornado's right on you, I've seen some videos from storm chasers in the past year where they were directly hit by a tornado. I don't think I would get out of my car in that situation after watching them go through what they went through because their power lines down, they were arcing, cars getting pushed around. Like as bad as it is, just cover up and try to stay in your car if something does happen upon you.
All right, thank you, Tom and Tim. That was fascinating dialogue.
Wasn't that interesting? I mean, and we could have really talked all day about weather safety, and it's so top of mind, right? Because of everything that we've gone throughout the winter and with the severe weather that we had in February with those tornadoes, it is so top of mind now in our area. And Tim and the folks at the National Weather Service, it can't be stated enough. Those are the folks that are issuing the tornado warnings and the severe thunderstorm warnings. When you get the alert on your phone, it's coming directly from them, and they saved lives during that tornado in February for sure.
And we have direct communication with them during severe weather events. You know, if you're watching us during a severe weather outbreak, a lot of times we'll reference this chat room that we are all in. We have a fantastic National Weather Service branch here in Southeast Wisconsin, as Tom just mentioned. So we're so thankful for them and their communication with us, and it makes severe weather coverage so much easier.
Yeah, and in referencing that chat room, I think what's something to note is it's accessible to meteorologists and to EMS personnel. So it's nothing that the public can get direct access to, but they give us valid information that we need to help analyze what's going on the ground, because while we're analyzing the radar, we can't always be out there to get those reports and to really know what's happening. So very vital part of our storm coverage, and a lot of fascinating information that Tim provided us with.
Yeah, and that chat system as well really helps to keep everybody kind of on the same page, if you will, from a communication standpoint, which is really important, right? Because you don't want to have different pieces of information flying around. You want everybody to be on the same page when it comes to the weather communication, right? And that's one of the things that really helps.
And we need that communication to be accurate, which is why that group is vetted. To get into that chat group, you have to, be a professional. You have to be someone that we can rely on for accurate information. And so when we reference that chat group on the air, you can rest assured that there's an expert voice behind it. So let's shift and start talking about flooding here.
Yeah, turn around, don't drown is the saying we usually use. You hear it all the time when talking about flooding, but it's advice that can save your life, especially this time of year. Coming up, we're looking at spring flooding and why this year things will be different than years past.
And when it rains in Milwaukee County, well, have you ever wondered where all that water goes? Tens of millions of gallons end up here in the deep tunnel. We'll show you how it works and why it was built in the first place. Also ahead.
Plus, when thunder roars, go indoors. Look at that lightning. You've heard that saying once or twice, right? But it is true. Ahead on the Fox 6 Spring Weather Special, the other things you should and should not do during a storm.
And another severe weather fact. Much about tornadoes does indeed remain a mystery. They are rare, they are hard to predict, and they are deadly. The U.S. has more tornadoes than anywhere else in the world. Well, it's a sure sign of the spring season, the spring floods. This video is from April 9th when we had those downpours and created flash flooding on some of the area roads and the freeway right on the North Shore right there. And of course, you can't talk about spring without talking about the spring flooding.
And this year, things are a little different because of the lack of snow statewide this winter. Coming out of winter, rivers were way below average. Now, of course, we first have to talk about the floods we're seeing this April. We're only 4 days in, of course. A couple of days of downpours and some snow showers leading to flooding on many of our local rivers and creeks.
And you might remember last year. It was a bad year for flooding. Heavy amounts of rain and rapid snow melt combined to cause flooding all across the state. In fact, it was so bad that Governor Evers declared a state of emergency.
Milwaukee County saw record February rainfall. This is video from the Root River Parkway in West Allis, where cars got stuck in the floodwaters. The Mississippi River hit near record high water levels near La Crosse, Wisconsin. The northern parts of the Mississippi River Basin in places like the Twin Cities received as much as 7.5 feet of snow last winter. As it melted, it headed down south and caused flooding downstream.
Wow, incredible video once again. So recently I got a chance to talk all about flooding with Sarah Marquardt. She is a senior hydrologist with the National Weather Service in Sullivan.
And we are joined by Senior Service Hydrologist Sarah Marquardt, and you're, of course, with the National Weather Service, based here locally. And for those who don't understand what hydrology is, give us just like the real 101 version.
So we forecast the weather and I try to assess the impacts on the ground. So where's there going to be flooding? And also I look at drought conditions.
Okay, so it's a little bit like back in grade school, the water cycle, right?
That's right.
You're responsible for the rain once it enters the rivers and the streams and everything else, and hopefully not someone's basements. So let's talk a bit about the spring flood outlook. Every year we look ahead to see what is coming our way because spring is typically the more prone flooding period. What does the 2024 outlook look like for us?
So it's been pretty wet the past several weeks. So right now we have an elevated risk for flooding. We've had quite a wet March, so the ground is very saturated. The ground is like a sponge. So right now it can't really hold much water, especially after the rain we had on April 2nd. So we are at an elevated risk. If we do get another heavy rain event, the ground can't absorb as much water as it normally would for this time of year. So for the next few weeks, we are at an elevated risk for for flooding if we do get heavy rain.
All right. Is that a typical spring pattern, or is this also being influenced with the outgoing ENSO or El Nino pattern?
So typically, springtime is when we do get a lot of flooding. Especially if the ground is still frozen or if there's a lot of snowpack on the ground. When that melts and then you get heavy rain, the combination of that can result in a lot of flooding. So springtime is a time frame of concern for flooding. With the El Nino this year, it was actually a very mild winter. So we didn't get that big snowpack that we normally do. So we didn't have that big snowpack that melts and sometimes causes a lot of flooding. But it was a wet winter. And we did get steady rains all this winter. So that's what's contributing to our elevated risk right now.
Right. And we didn't also really get the same cold. I mean, we got about 1 week really of truly cold weather. Did that impact or will that impact the flood outlook because we didn't really have the same frozen soil that we would on a different winter?
So our flood outlook changed over the course of this winter because we had that mild weather. We didn't really get that snowpack. Now, it was wet going into the middle part of winter, but then February was very dry and river levels decreased during February and our flood risk lowered because the ground was fairly dry and it wasn't frozen because of the mild temperatures that we had. So our flood risk was a little bit lower back in February.
So it was still absorbing because it wasn't frozen.
Right. Yeah, that was pretty unique this year, being how mild it was. The ground was thawed and that water slowly soaked in, whereas other years, if it's totally frozen, that water all runs off and that can result in more flooding.
All right. So the lack of snowpack, will that have an impact for agricultural concerns? Because farmers do tend to, count on that every year.
Yeah, the snowpack can have impacts for agriculture and also fire weather. So snow slowly melts during the springtime and that can add more moisture to the ground and help keep things from drying out too much. So without that, that can be a concern that things are too dry. But things changed this March and it got a lot wetter. So we kind of went from dry in February to very wet now. So we've been in this wet pattern. The ground's very saturated. So yeah, we're in a much wetter place and that flood risk did change and we're not seeing the dryness that we saw back in February.
Looking forward to the remainder of spring and early summer, do you see any patterns emerging as far as flooding?
So we are coming out of El Nino, shifting to a La Nina pattern, which during the spring and summer months, there's not really a big correlation to precipitation one way or the other. So in terms of a long-term outlook, there's not really a signal one way or the other, but there's always a risk for flooding anytime there's heavy rain. And, even though there's a greater risk in springtime with the snow melting and the frozen ground, anytime you get heavy rain, there's a risk of flooding. And we do see an increase in flooding during the late summer and early fall months around here. So that's a time frame of concern, but it can happen any time of year when you get that heavy rain.
And as we get into the more active severe weather season, obviously severe weather includes the potential for flash flooding and heavy rainfall. So it is all connected in that way. Let's talk a little bit about flood safety, because all too often we see videos of people driving through water or, heaven forbid, walking through flood water. Tell everybody how incredibly dangerous that is.
Yeah, you never want to go near flooded waters. Just a foot of water can sweep someone off their feet, and a fast current, you can't recover from that. It can carry away a moving vehicle. So moving water and high water is very dangerous. And, you don't ever want to go into that, whether it's moving across a road or whether it's a swiftly moving river. It's very dangerous. And even if you think you could go travel into that area, you may wreck your car and stall your car out or put someone else in danger by having them rescue you.
And it can be deceptive, right? You don't really know how strongly that water is flowing. It may look calm on the top, like it's just some big ponded water, but you don't know what the flow is down below.
That's right. And you can't see the bottom. So you don't know if that road is even there. So it's very dangerous. You never want to go anywhere near that water. And it's dirty. Don't let your kids play in it. I mean,
that was my next question,
good.
right? Because a lot of times, I mean, this is more common perhaps with tropical weather, but a lot of times the impact of flooding can be months, weeks down the road with the spread of disease and infection because the flood water is not clean.
Yeah, that's a good point. Those floodwaters could stay there for weeks after the flood is receded, and that water is dirty, it has infection, and you don't know what's under there. You don't know if there's electrical currents, wires there, and what dangers lie underneath the water that you can't see.
All right. And just kind of our last question here, is there any advice you can give just on an individual level of what people can do if they do live in a flood-prone area? Is there something we can do to kind of help out?
Yeah, so educate yourself about the area you live in. Do you live in a flood-prone area? Are there roads nearby on your commute that are prone to flooding? Identify those areas and know a safe way to go if those waters are flooded. And there's a lot you can do to protect your home. You can elevate things in your basement, install a sump pump and a battery backup in case the power goes out, and waterproof those items, put them in a container, elevate them, and prepare now. I mean, you don't know when that flood may occur, but prepare now. Consider getting flood insurance. That there's a waiting period with that too. But
there you go.
A lot of things you can do.
Check the grading around your house as well. Make sure it's flowing away from the house. You can check the downspouts as well. Make sure they're long enough to get the water away. Because the worst thing is when you get water in your basement, because there's just no getting out from under that. Everything down there gets soaked and most of it ends up in a dumpster, right?
Yeah, we don't want that to happen. So yeah, there are things you can do and do it now before the rain comes. Do as much as you can to protect your home and your property.
All right, is there a great website for folks to check out just to get some ideas?
Yes, if you go to the National Weather Service, there's a flood safety website. We have tips for what you can do before, during, and after the flood.
All right, thank you so much, Sarah. I really appreciate you joining us for our weather special.
Thank you, Rob.
Okay, Sarah, obviously an incredibly talented, very knowledgeable hydrologist, and even she was kind of taken aback by the months going through the winter with the dry, and then of course the incredibly wet start to spring that we've had, meteorological spring, with March being a top 3 wettest March of all time.
And it's amazing how we can go from very dry to suddenly very wet, right? It doesn't take a lot. It can take one storm and suddenly you're dealing with flooding-like conditions.
Very cool. All right, well, we've talked a lot about flooding, but how do we deal with flooding?
That's right. And to help deal with flooding, the Milwaukee Metropolitan Sewerage District has a deep tunnel. The treatment plant can only process so much rain and wastewater per day. The deep tunnel is used to help store some of that water. But when it's full, in order to prevent sewer backups in basements, a relief valve sends untreated water, raw sewage, to rivers that then flows into Lake Michigan. A majority of that is rain and groundwater, but the rest, what you flush down the toilet.
The deep tunnel was built to address that dumping into the lake. It was constructed in 3 phases. The first section was complete in 1993. You can see on the map, it's located on the north side of the city. It runs anywhere between 120 and 340 feet below ground. In total, the tunnels can hold 521 million gallons of water.
1 inch of rainfall over MMSD's 411 square mile coverage area is equivalent to about 7 billion gallons of water. So when we get a lot of rain, you can help be part of the solution.
Just try to use less. We have 1.1 million people in our service area. So if everybody cut down by just 10 gallons, that's going to add up to be a lot of water that we're keeping out of the sewer system, which leaves more room in the system for all the rain.
So for example, on days with heavy rain, you can hold off on washing dishes or doing laundry. You can also take a shorter shower.
fascinating. Just the numbers alone are kind of mind-blowing, right? The billions of gallons or whatever.
Right.
And it also speaks to, how the infrastructure in Milwaukee is set up. When we were talking to Sarah, we talked about soil and its ability to absorb moisture. Well, when most of your ground is covered by concrete and asphalt, that doesn't happen.
Right, absolutely. And it also really speaks to the volume, no pun intended. Just the volume of water, right? And, you think heavy rain, oh, yeah, it kind of floods my yard a little bit, this and that. But, to really see and take a deep dive, again, no pun intended there either, but to see where that water goes, and then you add in washing dishes, taking showers, right? All the water that we use in combination with the heavy rain, it's a big deal.
So it really is quite simple. On days where we have really heavy rainfall, even if we don't end up having that water drop alert, just try to use less, as we just heard. Maybe shower the next day, don't run the dishwasher. Simple things really are beneficial.
It's your excuse to not do laundry that day.
Exactly. Or the dishes. I'm in.
There you go. Take the win.
Well, ahead on the Fox 6 Spring Weather Special, where there's thunder, there's lightning.
A single lightning strike heats the air briefly to around 50,000 degrees Fahrenheit. That is 5 times hotter than the surface of the sun. Coming up, what you should not do should you find yourself trapped outside in a storm.
And by now, you might be sneezing and reaching for those allergy meds. Ahead, some tips to help you fight spring allergies.
And fact about flooding, except for heat-related fatalities, more deaths occur from flooding than any other weather-related hazard. It's springtime and trees are starting to bud, flowers start blooming, days are longer, and it seems like everybody is suffering from allergies.
Allergy season came early, and if you have it, it's pretty bad. Mild winters may be to blame. Pollen levels are already high across the U.S., including here in the Midwest. Allergists are warning that this year many Americans are already experiencing those familiar symptoms.
I'd like to say that seasonal allergies, if they start sooner, they end sooner, but that's typically not the case because it's really all about the temperature and the climate. We're seeing warmer weather throughout the year.
Allergists say the key is to get ahead of it. He says, start taking your medications now. Don't wait until it hits you. One other helpful tip, take a shower at night before bed so you can get all of that pollen off of you before you head to bed. That's great information. All right, well, as for the pollen, we do need it. Pollinators play an important role in our ecosystem and for our food production.
Bumblebees are considered super pollinators. A dozen or so species of bumblebees call southeast Wisconsin home, but many of those species have been declining. A loss of habitat, invasive species, and use of pesticides have all been linked to the troubling trend. It's important to protect the ecosystems that sustain them with spring ephemeral plants.
Bumblebees are some of the best pollinators, and some species of bumblebees and bees choose to nest in sites based on the density and the population of the surrounding ephemeral plants.
Spring ephemerals are some of the best things for pollinators. The plants have a short life cycle in spring, right when the queen bumblebees come out of her winter slumber. There are dozens of species of spring ephemerals, including native trillium, bluebells, Dutchman breeches, bloodroot, trout lily, and twinleaf. Lightning is the most common severe weather activity encountered annually in the United States.
Coming up, we are going through some of the most common myths surrounding lightning and what you should do to keep yourself safe.
And it's your chance to be the eyes and ears for the National Weather Service. The class is happening right now that they'd love you to be a part of. The Fox 6 Spring Weather Special returns after this quick break.
Wow, the Lightning Safety Council calls lightning the underrated killer. And there are some important things to keep in mind when you hear thunder or see the lightning.
If you're close enough to hear thunder, then you're close enough to get struck by lightning. So if you can hear that thunder, the main thing to do is get inside. If you're out at the beach or out at a park, the best place to shelter is in your car. The metal frame of the car will protect you. If you were somewhere close to home or close to a building, if you're barbecuing or at an amusement park that has indoor restaurants, just get inside, take a break, have lunch, and that sturdy building will help protect you from the lightning.
So many things I want to comment about that, which number one, he said, get to a car, right? It's the metal frame of the car. It's not the tires. We often hear that.
Right.
It's not the tires. It's the metal frame of the car. And also tell your kids, right? If you can hear the thunder, you're close enough to be struck by lightning. Exactly. So that's something as kids are outside playing in the summer months and so on as well. When it comes to lightning, there are quite a few pervasive myths and dated advice. So let's take a look at some of the big ones.
All right, so here's myth number one. If there aren't clouds overhead, you're safe from lightning. Well, fact is, lightning often strikes more than 3 miles from the center of a thunderstorm, well away from falling rain or any of the big storm clouds. In fact, it can strike 10 to 15 miles from the thunderstorm in areas that may indeed have blue skies ahead.
Wow. Well, myth number two, if someone is struck by lightning, they could electrocute you, so you shouldn't touch them. The fact here with this is that one is not only false, but it's dangerous because that person needs help. The human body does not store electricity. So somebody who's struck by lightning, they need first aid. You should call 911, try to get the victim indoors, and follow CPR instructions if given by the 911 operator.
All right, and myth number three, if you are caught outside in a storm, crouch down and make yourself small. We've all heard this, right? The idea being that lightning is attracted to tall objects. All right, this is actually a bit dated when it comes to advice. So about 15 years ago, the National Weather Service stopped recommending the crouch because it actually doesn't make you any safer. If you're outside and hear thunder, it still is best to run to a substantial building or that hard-topped vehicle. So that's a big one.
Yeah, and should we also mention, if you're on the golf course.
Yes, baseball diamonds.
Yes, baseball diamonds. Get off the golf course.
Please.
And just know that lightning, again, as you heard it say, the most underrated killer, right? And it can strike several miles away from the parent thunderstorm. And so it's so important to take lightning safety very seriously. And it's important to mention on our FOX6 Storm Center app, for free, we have lightning alerts. It will say lightning is within X miles of your area. So you can get those free lightning alerts as well.
And as we just heard, you can be several miles and still be struck. And while very little in life should come down to a gender bias, when it comes to getting hit by lightning, gentlemen, we are leading the charge. Most of that is poor decision making. I will have to say in recent...
No comment.
Yeah, right. I will have to say, though, ladies, in recent surveys, you are closing the gap. That's not a good thing. All right. So the National Weather Service is looking for your help. All spring, the National Weather Service hosts weather spotter classes, weather spotter training classes. So storm spotters, you can help keep your community safe by providing that timely and accurate information and reports of severe weather to the National Weather Service. So the Weather Service is holding classes all across southeastern Wisconsin. You can take a closer look at the locations. Just search fox6now.com for NWS Storm Spotter. It should be right at the very top.
Oh, and can we talk real quickly how important storm spotters are?
Right.
Yes.
It's huge. It's huge for us in the weather community.
It really is, because we're not in every spot. We don't know what's actually happening there at the ground. So storm spotters, to have a ton across the area, that's so helpful to us to know how big the hail is, if there's a tornado on the ground, if you see a wall cloud, or even just how heavy the rain is.
Right. And the training, you don't have to have any previous experience. The training is all-encompassing. That will teach you what you need to know so that you can give us the kind of high-quality information that we need.
Yeah.
And it's free. It's open to the public. And, if you tell us, if you send us an email or a social media post that says, hey, I've got X amount of hail, I've got, baseball-sized hail or whatever it is. Oh, and by the way, I'm a trained storm spotter. That goes a long way with us as well. We take those reports. We talked about the weather chat earlier, right, with the National Weather Service. We send those in. We send your reports into the National Weather Service, and then they turn in those reports into official government reports that come out and then turn into our computer systems and so on. So our viewers play a huge role when it comes to severe weather, and it comes back to those spotter training classes.
Right.
And we know we have some of the best viewers in the biz, so we encourage you to get involved.
All right, well, some communities have already sounded their tornado sirens this year. When a tornado warning is issued, it's one of many alerts that goes out to the public. There's also wireless emergency alerts, pushing notifications on phones and weather radios. The question is, which is the best? The answer is all of them, really.
Each has their own benefit. Sometimes, though, depending on phone settings, you might not get alerts. One great free tool to get around that is the FOX6 Storm Center app. Our Ben Handelman is here to explain.
You hear us talk all the time about the FOX6 Storm Center app, but have you actually seen how it works? I want to show you some of the features here. First off, the best feature, it's free. You can download it for Apple and Android. It takes you seconds to set up. The next best thing about it, it's super easy to use. The first thing you want to do, set your location. This will walk you through. It'll ask you all of this. You can set it to auto. That'll be wherever your phone is. Or you can actually pick a location anywhere you want. From there, make sure you have notifications enabled. You'll have to go into settings for that, or you can do it when you set up the app. It will ask you one of the first things before you really can start diving into this. Then you can check out the interactive radar. This is one of my favorite features. It's fully customizable, whether you want to track storms, temperatures, wind speed, and direction. Then, of course, we have the daily forecasts and the extended forecasts. Again, you can base that off your current location or the one you pick. So if you haven't tried out the FOX6 Storm Center app, try it now. Once again, it's not going to cost you a dime. Back to you guys.
All right, important to remember, of course, that you have to have all of the pieces turned on. You got to make sure that the warnings are on. And by the way, another cool feature of the app, it was updated FOX6 Weather Webcasts. We do those, we record them and upload them multiple times a day.
And one thing going back to those sirens is they are meant to be heard outdoors only. You cannot rely on those if you're inside a structure of hearing those sirens and getting the alerts. So the phone app is a great way when you're indoors to get those location information at all times.
That's right. And I think peeling back the layers a little bit too, you mentioned the weather webcasts, right? We often get the question, people will say, oh, do you just come in and go on TV? No, there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes, right? Those weather webcasts being one of them. There's a lot that we do in terms of forecasting, putting the forecast together, getting all of that out, not only on air, but also on social media, online, and so on, to get all of that information out to you. And one of those is the FOX6 Storm Center app, where we're able to get that directly to the palm of your hand.
There you go. And you can actually use that app to talk to us too, because there is a way on the app for you to send us weather video, weather pictures, and be a part of our storm coverage.
And we love seeing viewer photos. Any type of weather, even sunny days, even flowers. We love seeing those. So keep sending them in.
And you usually see those featured sometimes on our newscasts.
Yes.
So if you send those in, you might get your name and picture posted.
There you go. Like I said before, best viewers in the biz, bar none. Well, I want to thank you so much, of course, for tuning in to the FOX6 Spring Weather Special. Be safe out there, and don't forget to download that app.